The words didn't sound like fear. They sounded like law. Stay silent. King Lucien Raven, immortal monarch of the Night Court, the man whose name made entire kingdoms lower their eyes, had barely crossed the palace threshold when a trembling human hand clamped over his mouth and yanked him backward. Not guards. Not ceremony. Not torchlight and bows. Darkness. A narrow linen closet swallowed them whole. Stone walls cold, shelves packed with folded sheets that smelled of soap and lavender, and the faint metallic hint of old iron in the air. Lucien's instincts surged, sharp as a blade. Turn, strike, demand answers. A king did not get dragged anywhere. But the girl's eyes stopped him. They weren't pleading. They were certain. Certainty was rarer than courage and far more dangerous. Footsteps moved outside the slatted closet door, measured, synchronized, not the lazy pacing of palace patrols. Lucien felt the pattern in his bones. Trained hunters, coordinated, searching. The girl's heartbeat thundered so loudly he could almost count its frantic beats. Her fingers shook against his lips, yet her grip did not loosen. When Lucien tried to turn his head, she pressed her mouth to his ear and whispered, so softly it felt like breath turning into fate. If you speak, you die. Lucien's pride flared. For centuries people had begged for his mercy. Tonight, a maid threatened him in his own home. And then his body betrayed him. A wave of dizziness rolled through his skull, ugly, sudden, wrong. His boots felt heavy on marble that seemed to tilt beneath him. The weakness had been haunting him for weeks. Tremors in council, sudden cold sweats, a dimming at the edge of his strength that he had blamed on stress, age's imitation, or some distant curse. Now it hit like a truth-stamped letter. This wasn't normal. This was targeted. Outside, voices floated into the corridor, soft at first, then clear enough to cut through stone. One voice belonged to Queen Seraphine, his consort, whose public smile could warm a winter hall and whose private warmth had become rare as mercy. The other voice belonged to Lord Alaric, Lucien's younger brother, charming, adored by nobles, always standing just close enough to the throne to make the court wonder if the crown might someday shift. He's still standing, Alaric muttered, irritation sharpening his tone as if Lucien were a stubborn problem rather than a sovereign. Seraphine laughed quietly, a sound like poured wine. I told you the poison works slowly, she said, calm and intimate as if discussing a garden, not a murder. I already doubled the dose in the ritual chalice. By the new moon, he won't have the strength to question anything. Lucien's immortal blood went cold. In one instant, every dizzy spell, every tremor, every moment he had felt his power dim snapped into brutal focus. It wasn't age. It wasn't fate. It was poison, served during sacred rites meant to honor the Raven bloodline. Alaric spoke again, eager now. And the documents? The re-swearing ceremony, will the Night Guard accept it? Seraphine's reply was silk over steel. They already did. He wasn't present to bind it with blood authority. The captain answers to you now, not him. The moment he weakens enough, we announce his illness. We guide him to sign, and if he refuses... She paused, and Lucien could almost hear the curve of her smile. We call it madness. The court loves a tragedy. The closet felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Betrayal landed heavier than any blade. His wife. His brother. The two people seated closest to his power, turning his trust into a weapon, his crown into a coffin. The girl's fingers tightened around his wrist, as if anchoring him to reality. The voices drifted down the hall, their laughter fading like warmth leaving a room. Lucien stood frozen, not because he lacked strength but because the kind of betrayal that came from family carved deeper than war. The corridor fell quiet again. The girl cracked the closet door open, listening like someone who had learned survival by being invisible. She moved with the skill of a person trained by danger, quiet, precise, careful. Lucien drew in a slow breath and whispered, the first word he had spoken since she grabbed him. Who are you? The girl's eyes flicked to his face. No bow. No flattery. No trembling, your majesty. Just a name offered like truth. Myra, she said. I clean the east wing. I carry linens. I pour wine when they command it. She swallowed. Lucien noticed bruising near her wrist, faint, half-healed, the mark of someone gripping too hard for too long. I was there, she added quietly, when they changed the oaths. Lucien's hand moved instinctively toward the signet ring on his finger, black iron set with a crimson stone. For centuries that ring had opened every door, commanded every oath, ended every argument. With one command his night guard would appear. Myra snapped forward and caught his wrist, stronger than her small frame suggested. Don't, she hissed. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Release me. Your captain answers to Alaric now, she whispered, trembling but firm. Calling him is signing your own execution order. The words hit harder than any insult. His ring, his symbol of absolute authority, had become a beacon for enemies inside his own home. A jagged hunger rose inside Lucien, sharp and wrong. Not the controlled hunger of a predator who knew his limits, but a raw, scraping need, like poison was severing the steady bond between his body and the blood that sustained him. His vision narrowed. His fangs ached. He hated that she saw it. He hated more that she didn't flinch. I know what you're feeling, Myra whispered quickly. Her eyes were bright with fear, but not fear of him. Fear for him. That's why they did it. If you lose control, if they see you feeding like a beast, they'll paint you as a monster. They'll turn the people against you and pretend they're saving the kingdom. Lucien forced himself to breathe through hunger, rage, humiliation, through the unbearable reality that he needed a human maid's guidance to survive his own palace. Why are you helping me? He rasped. Why risk your life for a king who barely knows your name? Myra's mouth tightened, and for a moment Lucien saw the weight of years in her expression. Years of being stepped over, spoken over, treated as less than human. Because someone has to, she said, voice low. And because I know what happens when powerful people decide someone is disposable. A memory flashed behind her eyes, something personal, painful, unfinished. Lucien studied her in the dim closet light. She was young but not naive. Pretty in a quiet way that didn't demand attention. Soft features, hair pulled back, simple uniform, hands that looked like they worked too hard for too little. Yet there was steel in her posture, as if life had taught her that gentleness was not weakness. It was a choice, and a dangerous one. You heard them, Myra continued. They're not just poisoning you. They're rewriting the kingdom while you're still breathing. That's why Seraphine wanted you weak, not dead. A corpse becomes a martyr. A mad king becomes a warning. Lucien's jaw clenched. Seraphine would never. The words died because the truth had already spoken in her voice outside the closet. Lucien's mind ran back through every ritual cup, every private smile that felt colder than it should have, every time she insisted on pouring the chalice herself as tradition requires. Tradition. What a perfect disguise. Myra opened the closet door wider, peering into the corridor. They're heading toward the council wing, she murmured. They'll want to confirm you're back. If they find you missing, they'll lock the palace down. Lucien's gaze hardened. Then we move. Myra blinked, startled. We. Lucien leaned closer, voice controlled, dangerous. You dragged your king into a closet and threatened him with death if he spoke. That makes you either reckless or loyal. Either way, you're already involved. Myra's throat bobbed. I'm not loyal to. Lucien cut her off. Not to me. To the truth. Something shifted in Myra's eyes, an emotion she buried quickly, like someone trained not to hope because hope gets punished. Lucien stepped into the corridor. The palace smelled like polished stone and old wealth, but tonight it also smelled like deception. Shadows clung to corners. Torches burned lower than usual. And where he expected guards to bow, he saw empty posts. My ring? He murmured, anger tightening his voice. How far does their reach extend? Myra hesitated. Far. That single word was a door slamming. They moved down a servant passage, narrow and hidden behind tapestries. Routes the nobles never noticed because they never had to. Myra led with instinct, turning corners without slowing. Lucien watched her carefully. A maid should not know the palace's secret arteries this well unless she had reason to hide. Or reason to run. Where did you learn to move like this? Lucien asked. Myra didn't look back. From trying not to get hurt. Lucien's hands curled into fists. Who hurt you? Silence. That silence was an answer. They reached a junction where a small window overlooked an inner courtyard. The moonlight spilled across statues, ancient vampire heroes carved in stone, their faces proud and cold. In the courtyard below, Lucien saw movement, 2 hunters in dark cloaks speaking with a guard captain. Lucien's breath turned icy. He recognized the captain's stance even from above. Captain Darius, his most trusted night guard. Darius listened to the hunters, and nodded. Lucien's stomach dropped with fury so pure it felt clean. Myra's whisper cut through his shock. I told you. Lucien's voice came out like winter. How long have they been planning this? Long enough to buy half the guard with fear, Myra said. And the other half with promises. Lucien pressed a hand to the stone, steadying himself as the poison tugged at his balance again. He refused to show weakness, but his body did not care about his pride. Myra noticed anyway. You need to sit. I need my throne back, Lucien snapped. Myra's chin lifted. And you'll die before sunrise if you don't stop pretending this poison is just an inconvenience. Lucien turned sharply, then paused. No one spoke to him like that. No one survived speaking to him like that. Yet Myra did not look cruel. She looked desperate, like she was arguing with a storm because someone had to. Lucien's anger softened just slightly into something unfamiliar. Respect. Myra, he said quietly, if you are wrong about this, if you lied. I didn't, she cut in. I heard them. I saw the chalice. I saw the way Seraphine smiled when you winced. And I saw Alaric give orders like he already wore your crown. Lucien stared at her. Why didn't you tell someone? Myra's laugh was bitter. Oh, the guards who answered to Alaric? The nobles who hate humans and would call me a liar? Seraphine's ladies who would have me punished for insulting the queen? I'm a maid. My words don't matter until someone powerful decides they do. Lucien felt something twist inside him. Not hunger, not poison. Guilt. Because she was right. His kingdom preached order, honor, justice. And yet a human girl with bruises on her wrists had learned the truth. Power decides whose voice counts. Lucien's gaze lowered to her bruises again, and something in him hardened like forged iron. Those marks, he said, voice dangerously calm. Who did that to you? Myra's hands curled into her sleeves. It doesn't matter. It matters, Lucien said. In my kingdom it matters. Myra flinched, not at anger but at the idea of being protected. As if protection was a language she didn't trust. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the passage behind them. Myra's head snapped up. Her face drained of color. Lucien heard it too, quiet train movement. Hunters. Myra grabbed Lucien's arm and pulled him toward a hidden door disguised as stone paneling. This way. Now. Lucien moved with her, forcing his body to obey despite the poison. The panel slid open into a narrow stairwell that descended into darkness. They slipped inside and Myra pushed the panel shut just as voices reached the corridor. Check the servant passages, a man ordered. The king returned unexpectedly. If he's missing, we lock the palace. Another voice, sharp, female, familiar, made Lucien's blood ice over. Seraphine. He can't have gone far, she said. He's weak. He's been weak for weeks. Find him. Before he embarrasses us. She spoke as if Lucien was already a problem to manage, not a husband, not a king. Myra pressed her back to the wall, breathing fast. The stairwell was so narrow Lucien could feel the heat of her body beside him. In the dark, her eyes looked enormous, still frightened but fierce. Lucien leaned close, his voice barely a thread. You saved me once already, he whispered. If we survive tonight, I will repay that debt. Myra swallowed. Don't promise me things you can't give. Lucien's tone turned cold and certain, the tone that had commanded armies. I am King Lucien Raven, he said. If I promise something, the world moves to make it true. Above them, the hunter's footsteps grew closer. A torch flared, light slashing through the corridor outside. Shadows shifted behind the panel like watching eyes. Myra's whisper trembled but did not break. They'll search every hidden stair. Lucien's gaze sharpened. Then we make sure they search the wrong one. He lifted his ring hand, then stopped. The ring was compromised. His authority was poisoned as much as his blood. Myra touched his wrist gently, a quiet reminder. You can't use that. Lucien exhaled slowly, recalculating. A king without his guard. A predator weakened by poison. And a human maid who somehow knew the palace like a map written under her skin. Lucien looked at Myra and saw for the first time, not just a servant, but a key. Not because she was useful. Because she was brave when bravery had no reward. Because she was kind in a palace built on fear. Because she had warned a vampire king of betrayal, when no one else dared. Outside the hidden panel, Seraphine's voice floated again, closer now, amused. Open it, she said. Myra's hand tightened around Lucien's arm. Lucien's eyes burned crimson in the dark, not with hunger, but with a promise that had nothing to do with blood. Tonight the palace would learn a new rule. And it would be written in something stronger than fear. The stone panel shuddered. What? Twice. Then the soft scrape of metal, someone sliding a thin blade into the seam to pry it open. Myra's fingers dug into Lucien's sleeve so hard her knuckles turned white. In the tight stairwell, her breath came fast, warm against his arm, and Lucien could feel how hard she was forcing herself not to panic. Above them, Seraphine's voice stayed calm, almost playful. Open it, she repeated as if ordering a servant to fetch tea. A hunter answered, Yes, your grace. Lucien's jaw tightened. His instinct screamed to rip through the panel and tear out throats, but the poison dragged at his balance, turning rage into a risky gamble. He could win a fight. He could not when being seen weakened. Not tonight. Myra's lips moved close to his ear. They'll look down the stairs. If they see you? I know, Lucien breathed. The blade slipped deeper. The seam widened by a hair. Lucien leaned down, his mouth almost touching Myra's hair, voice so low it barely existed. When I move, do not hesitate. Myra's eyes flicked to him in the darkness. Move where? Lucien looked down the stairwell into the black throat of the palace's underbelly. Into the old catacombs. Myra stiffened. No. Lucien's gaze sharpened. You know them. I know enough to know people don't come back the same, she whispered. They're cursed. Lucien's lips curled, not amusement, not arrogance. Something colder. Everything in this palace is cursed, he said. At least the catacombs don't pretend to be holy. The seam widened again. Light spilled in, torchlight, slicing across the stairwell wall, crawling toward their feet like a living thing. Lucien moved. Not loud. Not sudden. Smooth and controlled, like a shadow deciding to become real. He gripped Myra's hand and pulled her down the stairs. Myra stumbled, caught herself, then followed because she had no choice but survival, and because something in Lucien's touch said he would not let her fall. Behind them, the hidden panel cracked open. A hunter's torch shoved into the gap. Down there, someone barked. Footsteps pounded the first steps. Myra's breath hitched. They're coming. Lucien's eyes flashed crimson. Then we don't run. He stopped on the next landing and pressed his palm against an ancient iron sigil embedded in the wall, one Lucien hadn't touched since he was a prince. The metal was cold, carved with the raven crest and a language older than the kingdom itself. Myra froze, staring. That's old tongue. Lucien didn't look at her. It's older than that. He spoke one word, rough, guttural, alive with power. The stairwell groaned. Stone shifted. A heavy slab slid into place above them like a jaw snapping shut, sealing the passage and cutting off the hunter's light. The last thing Lucien heard before silence was Seraphine's amused voice, suddenly sharp. Find another way. He can't stay hidden forever. Then darkness swallowed everything. Myra exhaled like she'd been holding her lungs hostage. You sealed it. Lucien steadied himself against the wall, hiding the way his vision swam. Temporary. Myra stared at him as if he'd just pulled the moon down. Why didn't you use that before? Lucien's laugh was humorless. Because I built a kingdom that doesn't rely on secret doors. I thought loyalty was enough. Myra's expression tightened, a small, bitter thing. Loyalty isn't free. Lucien turned his head, eyes catching hers in the dark. No. It's earned. And for a heartbeat, the space between them held a strange tension. Two worlds colliding. Immortal power and human pain, royal pride and servant survival. Then Myra's voice went quiet. This way. She led him deeper. The stairs descended longer than they should have, curling under the palace like a spine. The air changed, cooler, heavier, carrying faint dampness and something older. Dust, stone, and the ghost of iron. At the bottom, the catacombs opened into a wide corridor lined with carved pillars. The torches here were dead. Only blackened sconces remained like burned-out eyes. Myra swallowed. No one comes down here. Not unless they're punished. Lucien's gaze swept the corridor. Or unless they're hiding. Myra hugged herself. Or unless they're being buried. Lucien didn't respond, but his hand subtly shifted closer to her, as if instinct had decided she belonged under his protection without asking permission. They moved through the ancient halls, their footsteps soft against stone. Every few yards, Lucien noticed symbols etched into walls, runes of binding, warnings, prayers. Some were vampire, some were human. Some were so old even Lucien's memory didn't name them. Myra stopped near a pillar carved with a raven whose wings were spread in a circle. This marks the Hollow Court, she whispered. Old stories say the first kings held trials down here. Lucien's mouth tightened. Not trials. Myra glanced at him. Then what? Lucien's eyes darkened. Executions. Myra's face paled, but she didn't run. That courage again, quiet, stubborn, costly. They reached a chamber where the ceiling lifted higher and the air grew colder. A broken fountain sat in the center, dry and cracked, its basin stained dark. Myra pointed. There's water further down, but... Lucien suddenly swayed. The poison surged like a wave. His knees bent slightly and his hand shot out to the wall. For the first time, Myra saw the king's control fracture. She stepped in instantly. Lucien. Her hands grabbed his arm, pulling him to sit on the fountain's edge. Lucien tried to pull away. I'm fine. You're not, Myra snapped, then softened when she saw his jaw clench with humiliation. You're shaking. Lucien stared at his own hand, his fingers trembling faintly like a betrayal in miniature. Myra's voice lowered. How long has this been happening? Lucien's throat worked. Weeks. And you told no one? She asked, incredulous. Lucien's gaze turned distant. A king who shows weakness invites knives. Myra's eyes flashed. A king who hides weakness invites poison. The words landed with a hard truth. Lucien looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw more than a maid. He saw a survivor who had learned the same lesson in a different form. Hide your pain or it will be used against you. Myra's fingers tightened around his arm. You need blood. Lucien's fangs ached at the word. Hunger clawed up his throat, savage and humiliating. His body wanted to feed. His mind wanted to stay king. Myra glanced away, cheeks tense. Not mine, she added quickly. I know what you are, but I'm not offering that. Lucien's laugh was strained. Good. If I fed from you while poisoned, I might not stop. Myra's eyes widened, fear flickering, then she swallowed it down. Then what do we do? Lucien breathed slowly, forcing the hunger down like swallowing glass. We find proof. Myra frowned. Proof? Lucien's voice turned sharp. If I return to the court with only an accusation, they'll call me paranoid. If I strike first, they'll call me monstrous. Seraphine knows that. Alaric knows that. Myra's mouth tightened. So you need evidence before you move. Yes, Lucien said. And we need allies who still remember what honor is. Myra's gaze dropped. You don't have many. Lucien didn't deny it. Silence stretched. Then Myra whispered almost too quietly to hear, I know where they keep the ritual records. Lucien's eyes snapped to her. Where? Myra hesitated. The fear in her face wasn't fear of being caught, it was fear of being seen as useful because useful people get used until they break. The chapel vault, she said. Under the altar. Lucien's lips thinned. Seraphine will have locked it. Myra nodded. But there's another way. Lucien studied her. How do you know? Myra's hands curled into fists. Because I used to clean the chapel at night. The priest thought I was invisible. They talked. They left keys where they didn't expect hands like mine to reach. Lucien felt anger rise, not at Myra, but at a world that forced her to learn secrets just to survive. You shouldn't have had to be invisible, he said quietly. Myra flinched at the softness like it hurt more than cruelty. Don't, she whispered. Don't talk to me like I matter. People do that right before they take something. Lucien's chest tightened. Then let me be the first who gives something. Myra shook her head quickly. Kings don't give. They trade. Lucien leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, voice low. Then I will trade you this, my protection without price. Myra's throat bobbed. That's not how the world works. Lucien's gaze burned. Then we change the world. The words hung between them, dangerous, impossible, intoxicating. Myra looked away first, but something in her expression shifted, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. A faint sound echoed down the corridor. A distant metallic clang. Myra froze. Did you hear that? Lucien's senses sharpened, predator focus slicing through weakness. He heard it too, stone scraping, metal tapping. Someone else was down here. Myra's whisper trembled. No one comes into the catacombs. Lucien rose slowly, forcing his legs to obey. Then someone is searching where they shouldn't. They moved quietly toward the sound, hugging the shadows. The corridor narrowed, then opened into another chamber, smaller, filled with old tombs and sealed doors. In the center stood a figure with a lantern. A man in a dark robe, hood pulled low, holding a bundle of keys. Not a hunter. Not a guard. A priest. He muttered to himself, nervous. I have to finish it before dawn. The queen said. Lucien's eyes narrowed. The priest turned slightly and the lantern light revealed his face. Father Garrick, chapel keeper, the man who had blessed Lucien's marriage to Seraphine, the man who spoke of purity and sacred oaths. Myra's fingers tightened on Lucien's sleeve. That's him. Lucien stepped forward. Father Garrick jolted, lantern swinging. Who? Lucien let the hooded darkness see his face. The priest went white. His keys clattered on stone. Your Majesty, Garrick stammered, bowing so fast his forehead almost hit the floor. I thought you were dying? Lucien finished calmly. Garrick swallowed. I heard you were ill. Lucien's voice turned colder. And yet here you are in the catacombs with chapel keys speaking of the queen. Garrick's eyes darted around, panicked. I can explain. Myra stepped out of the shadows, her voice steady despite fear. You were going to hide something, weren't you? The priest's gaze landed on Myra like she was dirt. A maid should not speak to me. Lucien's eyes flashed crimson. In my presence she speaks. Garrick flinched. Myra lifted her chin. You're part of it. Garrick's lips trembled. I'm serving the crown. Lucien took a slow step closer. The crown is on my head. Garrick's breath hitched. Lucien's voice dropped into something deadly soft. Tell me what Seraphine asked you to do. The priest shook violently. I can't. She'll. Lucien's gaze hardened. She'll what? Kill you? Like she's trying to kill me? Myra watched Garrick and something in her eyes sharpened. She recognized fear like an old friend. She promised you something, Myra said quietly. Money? A title? Protection? Garrick's shoulders sagged. Lucien leaned in. Speak. Garrick's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a man drowning. She told me, he whispered, to retrieve the blood covenant scroll. The original binding of your authority. The one signed by the first kings. Lucien's stomach tightened. Why? Garrick's voice cracked. Because if she destroys it, your rule becomes disputed. The court can vote to stabilize leadership. Alaric. Lucien's hands clenched. So they plan to erase my legitimacy. Garrick nodded, tears forming. She said it's for the kingdom. She said you've become unstable. Myra's voice cut in sharp with outrage. You believe her? Garrick's eyes flicked to Myra again with disgust. You don't understand politics. Myra's expression turned cold. I understand cruelty. That's all this is. Lucien looked at Garrick. Where is the scroll? Garrick shook his head. I don't have it yet. Lucien's voice was a blade. Then you're going to take us to it? Garrick recoiled. I can't. Lucien's eyes glowed brighter. You can. Or you can stay here and let Seraphine decide whether you're a loose end. Garrick trembled, then nodded weakly. The chapel vault. Under the altar. Myra's hand tightened around Lucien's sleeve as if to remind him. I told you. Lucien turned slightly, gaze meeting hers. Myra, he said quietly, you just became the most dangerous person in this palace. Myra swallowed. I already was. I'm just tired of being afraid of it. For the first time, Lucien saw something else under her gentleness. Fire. They moved, Lucien, Myra, and a terrified priest, through the catacombs toward an old stair that would bring them up behind the chapel walls. As they climbed, Lucien's vision swam again, poison tugging at him like a chain. Myra noticed instantly and shifted closer, her shoulder almost touching his, silently offering support without making it obvious. Lucien hated needing it. And yet, it warmed something inside him that had been cold for a long time. At the top, Garrick pressed a hidden lever. A stone panel slid aside, revealing a narrow passage behind the chapel. They could hear muffled voices on the other side, priests murmuring prayers, torches crackling, the faint echo of footsteps. Myra whispered, if Seraphine suspects. Lucien's voice was quiet, lethal. Then we make sure she learns what it feels like to be powerless. Garrick pushed a final mechanism, and a small iron door opened into the space beneath the chapel altar. A vault. Old, sacred, lined with shelves of scrolls and sealed boxes. In the center, on a pedestal, sat a chalice carved from black crystal, stained faintly red. The ritual chalice. Lucien stared at it and rage nearly broke his control. Myra stepped closer, eyes narrowed. That's what she used. Lucien's hand hovered over the chalice, trembling, not from fear but from the poison's insult to his body. Then his gaze caught something else. A scroll case with a raven crest, sealed with royal wax. Lucien's breath went still. The blood covenant, he whispered. Myra looked at him. That's your authority. Lucien reached out, and before his fingers could touch it, the chapel above erupted with sudden noise. Boots. Many boots. A voice shouted, search the chapel. The king was seen near the lower passages. Myra's face drained. They found the catacomb seal. Lucien's eyes turned to steel. Then we have minutes. Garrick backed away shaking. They'll kill me. Myra snapped, you should have thought of that before you helped them. Lucien grabbed the scroll case and the chalice, evidence in his hands, truth made physical. Then the vault door above them boomed. A heavy impact. Again. Again. Myra stared up, breathing fast. What do we do? Lucien looked at Myra, this human girl with bruises and fire, this maid who had dragged a king into darkness and dared to speak truth in a palace built on lies. And something in Lucien's chest made a decision before his mind could argue. He stepped closer to her. Myra, he said, voice low, intimate, unwavering, from this moment on, no one touches you without losing their life. Myra's eyes widened. Lucien. He didn't let her finish. He pressed his palm against the vault wall and spoke in the ancient tongue again, one word sharp as a vow. The stone trembled. A hidden tunnel opened behind the shelf of scrolls, an escape route only the first kings would know. Myra stared shocked. You had another door? Lucien's mouth tightened. I built this palace on secrets I never wanted to use. The vault door above cracked, light spilling through. Hunters were breaking in. Lucien took Myra's hand. Run, he ordered. Myra ran with him, not because he was king but because in that moment he felt like the only safe thing left in a world that had never been kind to her. Behind them, Garrick screamed as the vault door burst open and torchlight flooded the chamber. A hunter shouted, There! The king! Lucien's eyes flashed crimson as he pulled Myra into the tunnel. But before the stone sealed behind them, Lucien heard Seraphine's voice echo down into the vault, cold, delighted, victorious. Oh, so the maid is with you. Then, softer, like a promise. I'll enjoy breaking her. Lucien's grip on Myra's hand tightened until it was almost painful. And in the darkness of the tunnel, the vampire king made a silent vow that shook deeper than hunger. If Seraphine wanted to break Myra, she would learn what it meant to shatter instead. The king without a throne. The tunnel sealed behind them with a thunderous finality. Stone groaned. Ancient locks snapped into place. And then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that waits. Myra stumbled as the floor dipped sharply, the tunnel slanting downward into darkness thick enough to feel. Lucien tightened his grip on her hand instinctively, steadying her without slowing his pace. Careful, he murmured. Myra let out a shaky breath. You don't sound poisoned anymore. Lucien didn't answer right away. His chest burned, hunger scraping at him like claws under skin, but fury had sharpened his focus into something cold and precise. Adrenaline, he said finally. It lies. They ran until their lungs burned and the air grew damp and cold. The tunnel twisted like a buried serpent, ancient and narrow, clearly not meant for large groups, only kings fleeing betrayal. At last, the passage opened into a cavern carved with deliberate symmetry. Black stone pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood a circular platform etched with sigils so old even Lucien felt their weight. Myra slowed, staring. What is this place? Lucien stopped completely. His face, usually composed, untouchable, shifted into something grim and solemn. This, he said quietly, is where Raven Kings were judged. Myra swallowed. Judged by who? Lucien's gaze lifted to the carvings above. By the blood. A faint hum stirred the air, low, ancient, alive. Myra stepped closer to him without thinking. You said there were no trials here. Only executions. Lucien nodded. Those who failed. Myra's heart thudded painfully. Then why bring us? Lucien suddenly swayed. This time he couldn't hide it. His knees buckled and he dropped to one knee on the stone platform, breath tearing from his chest. Crimson light flared briefly in his eyes, then dimmed. Lucien! Myra cried, dropping beside him instantly. Her hands grabbed his shoulders, holding him upright. His skin was cold, too cold. The poison, she whispered. It's getting worse. Lucien clenched his jaw. Seraphine doubled the dose. The chalice, it was bound to the ritual. It keeps feeding the toxin through my blood. Myra's hands trembled. Then we have to get you blood. Real blood. Now. Lucien's laugh was harsh. From where? I can't hunt. I can barely stand. Myra hesitated. Lucien felt it instantly. No, he said sharply. Absolutely not. Myra looked at him, fear and resolve battling in her eyes. You're dying. I will not feed on you, Lucien growled. Not poisoned. Not desperate. Myra's voice cracked. You saved my life. Twice. Lucien grabbed her wrist, not violently but urgently. And I intend to keep it saved. The silence pressed down on them. Then something strange happened. The sigils beneath Lucien's hand began to glow. Faintly at first. Then brighter. Myra gasped. Lucien. The floor? Lucien froze. He recognized the pattern now. These markings, he breathed. They're responding to her. The light shifted, not toward him but toward Myra. Thin lines of crimson energy traced across the stone, spiraling outward until they reached her knees, her palms, her chest. Myra recoiled. I didn't touch anything. Lucien stared, stunned. That's impossible. The air vibrated. The cavern seemed to inhale. A voice, not loud, not soft, but everywhere, echoed through the chamber. Blood recognizes blood. Myra clutched her chest. What does that mean? Lucien rose slowly despite the poison, eyes locked on her. It means, the platform is awake. The voice spoke again. The king bleeds. The kingdom falters. Lucien's fists clenched. I am still king. The sigils flared brighter. A king without balance is a crown without weight. Myra shook her head, panic rising. Lucien, I don't like this. Lucien stepped closer, his gaze searching her face, not predatory but reverent. Myra, he said hoarsely, what do you know about your family? She laughed weakly. Nothing useful. My mother died when I was little. No name. No stories. Just work. The sigils pulsed. The unseen root holds the tree. Lucien's breath caught. No, he whispered. That's not possible. Myra's voice shook. Stop saying that. Lucien lifted her hand gently, turning her palm upward. You stopped me from using my ring. You sensed danger before my guards did. You understood political cruelty without ever being taught power. He swallowed. And now the blood court answers you. Myra stared at him in horror. I'm just a maid. Lucien's voice was low and absolute. No, he said. You are not. The air surged. A sharp pain lanced through Myra's chest, and then something opened. Not physically. Internally. Memories that were not hers flickered at the edge of her mind. Stone halls bathed in moonlight, a woman standing before a kneeling vampire king, her voice calm, commanding, ancient. A woman with eyes like hers. Myra gasped, collapsing to her knees. Lucien, I can hear something. Lucien dropped beside her again, gripping her shoulders. What do you hear? Words, she whispered. Not spoken. Felt. The sigils burned crimson now. The first covenant was sealed not by fangs, but by mercy. Lucien's world tilted. The first queen, he breathed. She was human. Myra's head snapped up. What? Lucien's eyes burned with awe and shock. The founding legend says a human woman bound the vampire clans together, not through bloodshed but through restraint. Through compassion. Myra's breath hitched. That's just a story. Lucien shook his head slowly. No. It's a truth the nobles buried. Because it terrifies them. The voice thundered softly once more. The line returns. The glow surged, then vanished. Silence crashed down. Myra slumped forward, shaking. Lucien caught her instantly, pulling her against his chest. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Myra whispered, voice barely there, Lucien, what am I? Lucien closed his eyes. A threat, he said quietly. To every lie this kingdom was built on. Myra laughed weakly. That's not comforting. Lucien rested his forehead against hers. You saved me. You guided me. You activated a court older than my throne. He opened his eyes, gaze fierce and tender all at once. You are not weak. Footsteps echoed faintly, far above, distorted by stone. Hunters were still searching. Lucien's body trembled again, poison pulling him down. Myra felt it and panicked. You're getting worse. Lucien nodded. The ritual chalice continues to poison me as long as it exists. Myra's jaw tightened. Then we destroy it. Lucien looked at her sharply. You'd walk back into the palace? Myra stood. Her knees shook. Her hands trembled. But she stood. They already want to break me, she said. I'm done shrinking. Lucien rose slowly beside her, something in his posture shifting. Not just king but warrior. Seraphine will kill you on sight. Myra met his gaze. Then don't let her. Lucien stared at her for a long, charged moment. Then he went to one knee. Myra gasped. Lucien, what are you doing? He bowed his head, not as king but as man. Myra, he said solemnly, until I reclaim my throne, I have no right to command you. Her voice cracked. Stop it. I ask, he corrected, will you stand with me? Tears burned her eyes. I already am. Lucien rose. And for the first time since the poison entered his blood, something steadied inside him. Not power. Faith. They moved again, Upward now, through another hidden passage that led toward the old servants' quarter near the chapel. As they climbed, Myra whispered, "If I really am what you think I am." Lucian answered without hesitation. "Then the court will kneel." Myra swallowed. "And if they don't?" Lucian's smile was dark, dangerous, and utterly devoted. "Then we teach them." Ahead, torchlight flickered through cracks in stone. Voices echoed, guards, nobles, priests. The palace waited. And this time it would not recognize its king. Until it was too late. The queen's mask. The palace did not feel like home. As Lucian and Myra emerged from the hidden passage into the abandoned servants' gallery, the air itself felt different, thicker, tense, as though the walls were holding their breath. Torches burned brighter than usual, casting sharp shadows that clung to corners like listening ears. Myra paused, fingers curling into her skirts. "They've sealed the inner wings." Lucian nodded. Seraphine always tightens control before she smiles. A distant bell tolled once, low and deliberate. Myra stiffened. "That's the council bell." Lucian's jaw tightened. "She's moving faster than I expected." They slipped along the gallery, keeping to the shadows. From behind a lattice window, Lucian glimpsed the grand hall below. Nobles gathered in dark finery, murmuring in anxious clusters. Guards lined the walls, but not his guards. Their stance was wrong. Their loyalty was wrong. At the far end of the hall, Queen Seraphine stood beside Lord Alaric. She wore white. Not mourning white, ceremonial white. The color of purity. Of sacrifice. Lucian felt a surge of cold fury. "She's already writing my funeral," he muttered. Myra leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. "They're going to announce something." As if summoned by the words, Seraphine raised her hand. The murmuring fell into silence. "People of the night court," she began, voice ringing with practiced sorrow. "Our beloved king is unwell." Lucian's hands clenched. Seraphine continued smoothly, "For weeks, His Majesty has struggled with instability, hallucinations, sudden rages. The council urged rest. He refused." Alaric stepped forward, placing a gentle hand over his heart. "We did everything we could." Myra's nails dug into her palms. "Lies." Seraphine lowered her head as if weighed by grief. "Tonight, the king vanished from the palace. In his state, we fear the worst." Gasps rippled through the hall. Lucian watched noble faces twist, not with concern but calculation. Seraphine lifted her gaze again, eyes glistening. "Until His Majesty is found and declared fit, the council must act to protect the kingdom." Alaric turned toward the council dais. "I move for a temporary transfer of authority." Lucian felt the poison flare again, his vision blurring at the edges, not from weakness this time but from rage barely leashed. Myra whispered, trembling, "They're stealing everything." Lucian exhaled slowly. "No. They're exposing themselves." Below, the council murmured. Some nodded eagerly. Others hesitated, but fear was louder than doubt. Seraphine's gaze swept the hall. And then, it stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Lucian knew that look. "She senses something," he murmured. Myra's heart pounded. "We should move." Before Lucian could answer, a guard burst into the hall and knelt. "Your Grace," the guard said breathlessly. "The priest Garrick, he's missing." Seraphine's smile didn't falter. But her eyes went cold. "Find him," she said softly. "And seal the chapel vault. No one enters without my command." Lucian turned to Myra. "That's our window." They moved fast, down a narrow stair, through a disused passage toward the chapel's rear entrance. The closer they came, the stronger Lucian felt the pull of the ritual magic, dark, corrupted, feeding on his blood through the chalice. It made him nauseous. Myra felt it too. Her chest burned, not painfully but like a warning. "This place hates what she's done," Myra whispered. Lucian glanced at her sharply. "You feel it?" She nodded. "It's wrong?" Like something sacred was forced to lie. They reached the chapel doors just as voices echoed from behind them. "Alaric's men," Lucian said. "They've anticipated a move here." Myra looked at the massive doors, then back at Lucian. "If we go in, there's no hiding." Lucian met her gaze. "Then we stop hiding." He pushed the doors open. The chapel was full. Priests froze mid-prayer. Guards spun, weapons half-raised. And at the altar, the chalice, black crystal gleaming beneath torchlight, humming faintly with stolen power. Seraphine turned. Her breath caught, not in fear but in delighted disbelief. "Well," she said lightly, "the ghost returns." Alaric stepped forward, eyes flashing. Brother. You look unwell. Lucien stepped into the light, posture straight despite the poison tearing at him. Step away from the altar, he commanded. Seraphine laughed softly. You see, she said to the gathered guards. Delusions of authority. Myra moved beside Lucien. Every eye snapped to her. Seraphine's gaze sharpened. Ah, the maid. She tilted her head, studying Myra like a toy. I wondered who taught you to run. Lucien's voice dropped. Do not speak to her. Seraphine smiled wider. Or what? You'll faint? A few guards laughed nervously. Seraphine lifted the chalice. This kingdom needs stability. It needs a ruler who isn't poisoned by paranoia. Lucien's vision darkened, but before he could speak, Myra stepped forward. Put it down, Myra said. The chapel stilled. Seraphine blinked once, then laughed. You see, she said. Even servants think they command now. Myra's voice didn't waver. That chalice is killing him. Seraphine's smile sharpened. Yes. The word landed like a blade. Gasps echoed. Lucien stared at Seraphine, something in him finally breaking free of denial. You admit it. Seraphine shrugged gracefully. You were becoming inconvenient. Alaric added, you were softening. Lucien laughed then, not humor, not madness. Realization. So this is what love looks like to you, he said quietly. Seraphine's eyes hardened. Love is control. Myra stepped closer to the altar. A guard moved to stop her. Lucien's voice thundered. Touch her and you die. The guard froze. Seraphine's gaze flicked between them. Interesting, she murmured. You've bonded. Myra reached for the chalice. The moment her fingers brushed the crystal, the chapel shook. The torches flared crimson. Ancient sigils ignited across the altar stone. The priest cried out in terror. Seraphine stumbled back. What did you do? Myra gasped as a surge of energy coursed through her. Not pain, but recognition. The chalice cracked. A sound like breaking glass echoed through the chapel. Lucien cried out as the poison in his veins screamed, and then snapped. The connection severed. Lucien collapsed to one knee, gasping, but breathing freely for the first time in weeks. Seraphine screamed. No. The chalice shattered completely, black crystal splintering across the altar. The hum died. Silence fell. Lucien stood slowly. The color returned to his face. His eyes burned bright and clear. Seraphine stared at him, horror finally breaking through her mask. That was impossible. Lucien looked at Myra with something fierce and reverent. Nothing involving her is impossible, he said. He turned to the guards. Arrest the queen, he commanded. Some guards hesitated. Then one knelt. Then another. Then many. Seraphine backed away, rage twisting her beauty. You fools. She's human. Myra lifted her chin. And you're afraid of that. Lucien's voice was cold as judgment. Because humans remember mercy. Alaric lunged. Lucien caught him effortlessly, slamming him to the floor with a force that cracked stone. Guards, Lucien said calmly. Take my brother to the deepest cell. Alaric screamed as he was dragged away. Seraphine stared at Myra with naked hatred. I will destroy you. Lucien stepped between them. You already tried. As Seraphine was seized, she laughed wildly. You think the court will accept her? Lucien answered without hesitation. They will. Because now, they had seen her. And they could never unsee the truth. The crown of mercy. Dawn came slowly. Not with warmth, but with reckoning. The palace awoke to a silence it had never known. No whispered orders behind curtains. No hurried footsteps carrying secrets from room to room. The corridors stood bare, echoing only with the distant clang of cell doors sealing shut. Queen Seraphine sat in iron, her white ceremonial gown stained where guards had gripped her arms. Lord Alaric was gone, dragged beneath the palace into the same darkness he had planned for his brother. And at the center of the night court, King Lucien Raven stood whole again. But changed. The council chamber filled as nobles arrived, confused, frightened, curious. They took their seats beneath the towering ravens carved into the ceiling, eyes darting toward the throne. Lucien did not sit. He stood beside it. And beside him, uninvited, unannounced, stood Myra. Whispers rippled instantly. A maid. A human. Too close. Lucien let them whisper. Then he spoke. Last night, he said calmly, this kingdom was almost stolen, not by war, not by invasion, but by silence. The room stilled. Poison was poured into sacred rites, Lucien continued. Odes were rewritten in shadows. Authority was traded like coin. Murmurs turned sharp. Lucien lifted his hand. Bring them. The guards dragged Seraphine and Alaric forward, chains biting into their wrists. The sight of the queen in restraint shattered the last illusion. Gasps filled the chamber. Lucien's voice did not rise. That chalice, he said, was bound to my blood. Its destruction freed me, but it also revealed the truth. The poison. The conspiracy. The attempted erasure of a crowned king. A counselor stood abruptly. Your Majesty, if this is true. Lucien's gaze snapped to him. It is. The sigils of the blood court ignited along the chamber walls, ancient crimson light responding not to Lucien, but to Myra. The nobles froze. Some fell to their knees instinctively. Lucien turned toward her. Myra, he said softly, step forward. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to disappear. But she remembered bruises. Hunger. Being unseen. She stepped forward anyway. The sigils flared brighter. A low voice, felt more than heard, echoed through the hall, ancient and undeniable. Mercy bound the crown. Panic rippled. One noble whispered, the legend. Lucien spoke, steady and clear. The first covenant was sealed by a human woman. A queen not by blood, but by balance. Seraphine screamed. Lies. Lucien turned on her, eyes burning. You ruled through fear. She rules through truth. He faced the council. This woman saved my life, he said. She warned me when loyalty failed. She stood unarmed before poison and power, and did not bend. Myra's hands trembled. Lucien continued, voice lowering. You call her human as if that is weakness. He took her hand. I call it the reason this kingdom still stands. The chamber erupted. Some shouted. Some knelt. Some fled. Lucien raised his voice once, final, absolute. Kneel, or leave. Silence. Then one counselor lowered himself to the floor. Then another. Then many. Those who did not, turned and ran. Lucien turned to Seraphine. For poisoning your king, he said, you are stripped of title, name and blood rights. You will live, so you may remember. Seraphine screamed as guards dragged her away. Lucien turned to Alaric. For betrayal, he said coldly, you will remain where ambition rots in silence. Alaric was hauled out, sobbing. When the chamber finally emptied, only Lucien and Myra remained beneath the ravens. Myra exhaled shakily. They're afraid of me. Lucien turned to her, his expression gentler than any had ever seen from him. They should be, he said. Not because you are dangerous, but because you remind them they are accountable. She shook her head. I never wanted a throne. Lucien stepped closer. Neither did the first queen. He knelt. The sound echoed like thunder. Myra, he said, voice steady, reverent, stand with me. Not as symbol. Not as shield. He looked up at her. But as my equal. Tears blurred her vision. I'm still just a maid. Lucien smiled, soft, real. No. You were never just anything. She hesitated. Then she reached for him. The sigils flared one final time, bright, warm, complete. The kingdom settled. Not into fear. Into balance. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king ruled not alone, but beside the one who had saved him with silence, courage, and mercy.